start?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. The first thing on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the July meeting. Has everyone had a chance to look at them? Are there any changes that are recommended?
Karen, did we have the record button?
Yes.
In order to vote, those of you that are not showing your picture are going, the members are going to have to show your vote. So could you please put your video on at least briefly?
I'm trying to get mine on.
There you go.
The hell?
Very good. Are there enough?
That's the last for the video.
Can you put your video on so you can vote?
I did that.
Oh,
We're not seeing you.
yeah.
Well, I didn't leave it on because I didn't want to.
No, that's fine. It's just we're going to vote on the minutes. Thank you. All right, all those in favor, please raise your hand.
I
And there were no changes, so there apparently is no opposition. All right, the minutes then are approved unanimously. The next thing is the old business. And the first thing is an education subcommittee update. We are actually making good progress on that committee. It's slow, but it's meaningful. Karen, did you want to tell people what you've been doing a lot of work?
Yeah, I feel like we've kind of come to a little bit of a halt, but we have met about the MRF survey, which we I can't remember if we talked about it at a full committee or not, but trying to figure out if we can create some materials that informational materials that are relevant for both Rumpke and West Rock, because there are some slight differences in their accepted items. But we believe that the differences aren't too bad. And so that part of it is sort of in Rumpke's hands right now. They were looking at the MRF survey closely to get back with us about that. And we just had a discussion last week. We didn't have a quorum or anything, but we did have a discussion about some ideas and trying to get some kind of material that we can produce for the private haulers, and hopefully locally the private haulers are willing to share, and we can make sure everybody kind of sees the same information and it's consistent and therefore less confusing for people all across the county that might have seemingly different recycling programs, but really they're not. It just seems that way. So and then also that capture rate study that we're trying to get, that's in the process of a request for proposals that we're in the middle of right now. So we believe that once that actually occurs, we'll have some good results that can help us even further when it comes to what we will specifically educate residents about.
Karen, if I could add, I think we've kind of jumped into the three buckets with who we're looking to do. We've got the people that are extremely avid recyclers that are more detailed. They want more detail. We have the middle person who needs general information. They're willing to do it, and they just need to get better at generally at recycling. And then we have the people that, you know, they're not recycling, they're naysayers, or they just can't do it. And, you know, so I think with our education, if I'm not mistaken, we're kind of targeting that middle group with general information that works for both MRFs. and having it to be that consistent message. The people that don't recycle now, it's a totally different message. It's a totally different attack, to say the least, that we can kind of go after those people. The avid recyclers, they're going to be the people that are going to go that extra step. They're going to be the people that will search online. They're going to pay attention to the rock star Karen Maynard on No Waste Wednesday and contact her through there. But I think our general consensus is we don't have to be as real detailed in our messaging campaign. It's more important for it to be consistent and widespread. And we also talked about how we get that message to people. And I think we feel like that in person is always the best. Can't go to every door, but mailings, but also things that go on carts when they're delivered. Of course, that doesn't help with people that already have carts, but it's maybe something that we can work on as far as still getting it out and putting it on people's carts that have to set it out. So anyway, I just wanted to add that. I think that the education group is doing a fantastic job in getting some really good details, and it's going to where I think that we should be going, which is that consistent messaging. And, we're talking about residential right now, but where people don't realize this is we're working on multifamily with the apartment association, and consistent messaging is important there as well. So we're trying to get to that consistent messaging in all aspects of what we do. So I think we've all learned that over the past several years, how important that really is. Now be quiet.
Thank you.
Any questions? And the next item on the agenda is the contract subcommittee. And we talked briefly about that. Who's going to tell us about where you are in the process?
Okay, give me just a second, please.
Well, I will go ahead and mention, if you weren't there last week, we did not have very much participation in our contract subcommittee. So we decided to table the discussion for this committee in the hopes that we'd have more people, which we do. So that's good. And so we have Becky Caldwell here from, and I think you could unless Pete has any more of an introduction to what we're doing here, Becky could introduce herself.
Okay. So I'm Becky Caldwell. I'm the executive director of an association called the Construction and Demolition Recycling Association. And Pete reached out to our association and asked what could be done with construction and demolition materials as far as recycling those, specifically concrete, shingles, and gypsum. And so through that conversation, and I talked with a group last week, very good group. You all have a good handle on where you are now, and what opportunities you have. It's just navigating which opportunity you want to tackle next. Often I've been in and around the waste and recycling industry for about 27, 28 years now. And I've selected this term wicked over the years, because when you start to talk about waste and recycling, it's a problem that quickly becomes intertwined, because you're talking about transportation, you're talking about certain materials, you're talking about different processing. So essentially it's a problem that takes local government, state government, and private industry to solve and to come up with some good solutions that work for everyone, that make sense. So I've worked at the government level, I've worked at the state level, and I've also worked on the private side. I've done everything except run a landfill. So recycling is a passion, and it's something that I've learned a lot about over the years.
So I appreciate Becky being here. I think Adam and I think Matt Smith and Dave Wicking were also supposed to be here. I know Adam is. I'm not sure if Matt is that individual there with the 09 number at the end. But just a reminder about what our 5-year solid waste management plan is all about when it comes to construction and demolition debris is that we need to find a home for a lot of material due to a location that's kind of winding down, so to speak. So we have to increase our processing and ability to recover that material. But overall, it doesn't matter how much we recover if we don't have end use markets for it. And I think that's what we're really kind of working towards. And as part of the 5-year plan that was approved by the board, we have discussed that we want to do an RFP that hires a consultant that is going to help us increase end use markets. I would love to say that we have the expertise to do that, but we don't. And just trying to get into the door of the right places is something that we really need. So Becky is going to help us out. She's got that experience, and I really do appreciate her taking the time to be here. And I think Becky was going to do a little bit of a presentation for us. And then we was going to follow through maybe with some other discussion from Adam, Matt, and Dave if they're here.
Right, let's see if I can share my screen. Can you all see my screen?
We can see your slide presentation. You're in edit mode of it,
Okay,
but it works for me.
hold on just 1 second. Let me see if I can. How about now?
It's bigger.
I was say it's very small on my screen, and I am glad to speak to it from there.
Yeah, I think that's fine for us.
Okay. All right, so what I'm going to talk to you about primarily are end markets, and this is something that I think you all need to realize are difficult for everyone. You find a good end market for something, and then it dwindles away, or it reaches capacity. No one can take any more of a specific material. But then you have to find another home for it, or you back off and you store some material, and then the market comes back. It's that ebb and flow of economics, and it's truly, I've learned over the years, this business truly isn't it's a lesson in economics, and if you don't know a lot about economics, you'll learn real quick. And it's not going to advance. Did the slide advance for you all?
It did not.
Hold on just 1 second and let me see if I can.
We see the edit mode if you just want to click on the next one through that.
It looked like you did click on it, but it didn't change. Slide number 2.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, Becky, if you quickly sent the presentation to Karen, and if Karen would have more success.
That's maybe because she's the one that's actually hosting.
I actually might have it, but I did not look it up
That's okay.
recently.
We will get it to you. And I sent it with no subject line. You get it, Karen?
I didn't, but I found the other one if you didn't change it.
I didn't. There was one typo and there we go. Much better.
Let
So
me,
as Karen pulls the slide presentation up, and I apologize for the delay, this is the second slide, and this is just touching on, and what I wanted to tell you was Pete asked me to do just an overview of C&D materials, potentially what it looks like for certain uses, some of the things we see across the country and in Canada and Europe. We do have a couple of members that are European companies, but they do have a presence in the United States. And then we do have several Canadian companies in our association. We have a wide group of members that can give us a lot of feedback and have a lot of experience in different markets and different regions. So this is the EPA Sustainable Material Management Life Cycle. And if you start with number 1, you see you're extracting materials, which are usually the materials that are considered virgin materials. Take those to manufacturing, distribution, then the materials or the products are used, and then end of life management. And what you're actually talking about is taking out this materials extraction piece and doing end of life management and going straight into manufacturing. So that's when you start to talk about, like, say, shingle to shingle or gypsum to gypsum. One of the things that we're starting to see manufacturers do is take back shingles and put them into their mix. So skip the materials extraction piece, take shingles from homes or commercial buildings, any project they've got that people can bring shingles back to them or return them to the manufacturing facility. And then all of a sudden those shingles are processed into a much smaller, it's just a much smaller material. They have the processing equipment on the front end of the manufacturing process, and then they're actually able to put shingles that were on a roof that have served their purpose back into the manufacturing of new shingles. So what you're seeing in the end of life management, you'll see the most preferred, and this is just the triangle of what the EPA recommends for materials management. And they prefer that you reuse, and then you recycle or compost, energy recovery, and then landfill. So landfill is their least preferred way of managing materials. And about today is how to be more responsible with materials that can be recycled. But if you don't have a market, that's again the issue. Next slide, please, Karen. So this I'm not going to read to you, but I will tell you there is an environmental council of the state. I share this with you simply to say that if you look at this timeline in 1976, we looked at, RCRA came around. Basically, they were looking at how do we close dumps and make them landfills? What do we do to better protect the environment? Then you had 2009 when the EPA actually developed their sustainability materials management. It was a roadmap. It was truly the roadmap for recycling and recovering materials and how we could best maintain capacity in landfills. But then you see this push in 2016 and then 2017 and then 2021 and now in 2023 you see the federal government has right at $1 billion worth of funding available for recycling projects across the country from the federal government. And so what you'll see from the timeline primarily is just that where we started with let's protect the property and the land and let's take care of the environment by closing dumps and making them landfills. Now we've quickly marched toward let's recycle materials, let's find a better way to use materials that we've already extracted versus using more virgin materials in what we make and what we need. Next slide, Karen. This is the EPA C&D debris generation, just the percentage and or the makeup of what those C&D materials are. So typically C&D, which is construction and demolition, you're going to find wood, you're going to find shingles, you're going to find gypsum, you're going to find concrete, you're going to find asphalt if that's the driveway or the surface that was that the structure was built on. So in this depiction, this is from 2018, and basically concrete was a very high percentage. And then you've got asphalt concrete. Those two can be, they're not interchangeable by any means, but they can potentially be mixed to be one material, depending on how they're processed. Then you have gypsum and you have asphalt shingles, gypsum drywall and asphalt shingles. Those look to be two very small percentages. However, when you look at this overall and you think about what's left at the curb versus what you see on construction and demolition side, and you start to talk about weight and you start to talk about how much is diverted from a landfill, then you start to talk about if you put shingles or concrete or asphalt into a landfill, the ability for that to be compacted is very slim. And so all of a sudden you're dealing with a very brittle, very difficult material that will take up more space than needed and leave more open space around anything that it comes in contact with in the landfill. So basically you're creating pockets of air. Gypsum drywall becomes problematic for landfills if for no other reason because of the hydrogen sulfate that's put off as far as a smell. So if you're ever near a landfill and you smell something like a rotten egg smell, that's what they've taken gypsum drywall. I'm actually live in, and I was born and raised in Kentucky, but I live in Middle Tennessee. I live in the Nashville area now. And so what we're seeing here is our largest landfill is filling up. And one of the things we've seen is when our C&D landfills became, they were full first. And the minute they were full, all of those materials were diverted over to an MSW landfill. So instead of finding a way to recycle those here in Tennessee, and instead of recycling those materials, we ended up putting those in an MSW landfill. Well, now that 750,000 tons of C&D material in Middle Tennessee has gone into MSW landfill space because of the price, because of, again, economics. The price to landfill these materials was much cheaper than it would be to actually recycle them. That landfill is starting to reach capacity. We expect it to reach capacity mid-2025, Q2, Q3 of 2025. And the expectation is that we'll see a much higher tip fee at the landfill. Well, that in and of itself will push people to find some other way to manage certain materials so that landfill isn't used because it becomes more expensive then. Next slide, please, Karen. So this is just another snapshot from 2018. This is in millions of tons. It's the C&D material by C&D debris by materials, the generation rate. If you look down the list, you've got some of those we've just talked about. There's steel that's included here. I wanted to take a minute to talk through construction versus demolition versus deconstruction. So you'll hear all three of these words. Sometimes they're interchangeable. Just a quick difference in the three as you start to look at options and end markets. Construction is truly where you're building a structure or you're remodeling a structure. And so the construction materials are considered anything that's left over that was never actually installed in a structure. So if you're talking about drywall, you're talking about the cutoffs or the pieces that were cut from the full sheets. So all of a sudden you have this very clean, very reusable and or recyclable material because it's clean and it wasn't used with, it doesn't have paint or wallpaper. It's just clearly a cutoff from new construction or remodeling projects. Demolition is truly what I just like to call the wrecking ball, and it's just one big pile, and it's truly considered mixed C&D. So in that pile, you may have wood, you may have concrete, you may have anything you look around your home or your office and see that may be in that pile, obviously. Those materials are often taken to a processing facility, much like your residential recyclables are. And then those materials are plucked out that can actually be recycled or that have a market. Deconstruction is something you're going to start to hear more about. Deconstruction is something that a lot of communities are looking at that as a means to an end, so to speak. But the reality is for deconstruction to be effective and efficient as far as the economic piece of it, you're going to want to look at older buildings. So think through older buildings that had solid wood floors, not laminate floors. Older buildings that maybe had wallpaper, maybe not, maybe or maybe not had walls that were painted. The other thing about older buildings is that they're more natural products, more natural materials were used. They didn't use a lot of glues and a lot of other adhesives. So that's something to look at when you start to consider deconstruction. San Antonio is a city that's done great work on deconstruction, and they have a very strong area of their community that's historic, that they want to maintain historic. Some of the things they've been able to do is take the flooring out of one building or one home and put it into other buildings or homes that are close by, maintain some of that historic nature. But again, construction and demolition are still the most popular. Construction being the ability to actually have clean materials that have never been truly installed in a structure, and then demolition being your wrecking ball with a pile left over from the facility or the building or the structure that was demolished. Next slide, Karen. So here are some common end markets for the materials you all are looking at and talking about. Asphalt shingles can be remanufactured. I mentioned that. Gypsum drywall, there's a lot of agricultural use for gypsum drywall. And essentially drywall is sent through a pulverizer or a shredder that can take it back to powder. So you have this paper that's almost like fluff. So any of the paper that's on the outside, if it truly has paint or wallpaper on it, the process would separate that. And if that is truly from the construction side, then you can take that clean paper, that clean fluff, and send it to a paper mill, typically to be mixed in with material there to be turned into paper, to be recycled into paper or cardboard. But with the gypsum, it's a really good soil amendment. So anywhere you all have, I know you all have some agriculture close. I know I grew up in Eastern Kentucky. We had a lot of agricultural area there. The soil there is a little bit better than other places. Up in the Northeast, agricultural is one of their biggest uses for gypsum drywall. The other thing is animal bedding, because it does serve as a supplement to straw in barns and or other farm facilities. So that's turned out to be something that folks in the Northeast, as well as in the Carolinas, have used gypsum drywall for like a supplement to straw in barns and other farm use. Concrete's probably one of those that I scratch my head sometimes about it, simply because it is truly something that can be pulverized. You can pulverize it into rock of certain sizes. You can make it smaller into gravel, or you can pulverize it all the way to dust or sand. It can easily be mixed in with other materials. It can be put back into concrete in some cases. Some plants, just similar to asphalt shingles shingles in asphalt. Once you get the formula correct, once you know how much the volume is that you need to add or not add, there's a balance there. So on shingles, if you add more than 3.5% to asphalt, it's not going to hold up as well as if you put 5% shingles in it. So there's a formula there for everything. But concrete could be pulverized into road base. It could be used for drainage. It could be used around septic systems and or water lines and other areas where you would normally use rock or other things that are mined as virgin material. And then C&D fines is something that you all haven't mentioned, but I always try to mention this because that's what you have when you have a mixed C&D container of mixed C&D. You have this it's just what I call the leftovers, and it truly is just fines. It's splinters of wood, it's pieces of small pieces of shingle, it's little pieces of gypsum drywall. So it's truly just a mix of all of these materials. It's kind of like the pieces that crumble off the edge. That material has had a good life as a fill material and or landfill cover. Lots of places use it as alternative daily cover at landfills. Road base is something it's good for. You do have to be careful again for the composition and how much gypsum drywall is in it, so that you can be cautious of odor issues. But that's something that most any C&D material facility actually produces. Go ahead, Karen. He'd asked me to kind of give you all an idea of what it might look like if you had a facility, a facility that would separate C&D materials. So this is just a flow chart. Essentially, you're saying, okay, you've got your construction or demolition site on the left, at the top left. The waste is generated, the waste is collected, some of the waste is stored. Then you've got transportation, maybe. You've got a facility that you take it to that would be a quote dump site. And then you've got segregation. You always have segregation of what's reusable, what's recyclable, what has to be landfill. There's always a use for a landfill. I know that's hard to take for a lot of people, but there is always use for a landfill. When we talk about zero waste, there is always a residual amount that typically goes to a landfill. Now with waste to energy, you may be able to use that ash in concrete, but that's still waste to energy these days is a really hefty price tag. And the regulations continue to be more stringent, which is what we want to have clean air. Go ahead, Karen. This is what a separation, what a line might look like if you were looking at the flow chart. You said, okay, well, how are we going to put this into action? What are we actually going to see on the floor of a building? This would be very similar, and again, it is similar to a regular MRF for residential materials. Much heavier duty equipment because you're dealing with much heavier materials. You're dealing with, again, when you start to talk about concrete and you start to talk about shingles, you're looking at a much coarser, much heavier material versus what you would find in your household container. Next slide. So here's your 5-year plan, construction and demolition waste, specifically the recycling weaknesses. Recycling options for mixed C&D waste are not available. For this one, and I wanted to just touch on each of these separately and then open the floor for questions or comments. And certainly, I'm certainly here to help you all in any way I can. Recycling options for mixed C&D waste are, there are options out there, but as a city, it's oftentimes, and this is not just Louisville by any means, but a lot of cities or even a lot of states come out of the gate and say, okay, well, we need to just ban all of the drywall from the landfill. Well, that's great, but where does it end up? On the side of the road. So if you ban it and you don't have a plan or you don't have an alternative for it, then all of a sudden it ends up on the side of the road and it ends up as an illegal dump. So let's stay on the path of that drywall example. So you have drywall that you've collected from a construction site. It's clean, it's clean cuts from the site, and you don't really have anywhere to take it to be recycled. But what if you had an ordinance that really created a demand for it? Instead of banning it, you actually create a demand through an ordinance that says you may use, or this project shall use this amount. And all of a sudden you're driving people not so much for the material to be banned, but you're giving them a reason to use that material. And then on the private side of things, you have, well, in your all's case, you're a local government. So in your case, your state is, and I'm somewhat familiar with Kentucky, but not as familiar as I am with others. Your state may be looking at this, going, well, if someone else will try it, I mean, it's not their job to solve the problems. It's their job to address things that are brought to them to solve problems or to approve permitting and that type of thing. So on this one, you're looking at the state. They may say, hey, Louisville figured it out. Maybe this is something we can use for other, maybe this is something we can use in other applications, or the DOT would start to use it. But once you prove that gypsum drywall could potentially be used in agriculture, all of a sudden others may start to get on the bandwagon and start to use that material. When you prove that, okay, shingles didn't necessarily work in asphalt before because we used a much higher percentage than we should have. We've come further now, and it's hard once a company has been in the business and they've been burned and they've had to go back out and repave roads at their expense because they chose to put shingles in the mix and it was too high of a percentage. It's hard for them to come back. They've been burned, they lost money, they don't forget, and I don't blame them. That's a hard place to be when you start to look at certain materials. So for shingles, I would say you start small. Again, gypsum drywall, you start small, pretty much start small with anything. Concrete may be one of those that's a little bit easier to find a market for. It's just having the equipment to process it. Limited outlets for gypsum drywall. I'll tell you, there are limited outlets for almost any material. I have folks in our group, in our association, that have found lots of different outlets, lots of different opportunities for gypsum drywall that I haven't even thought of. There's a lot of R&D going on, research and development going on new technologies. You're going to find if you stay around me very long, I'm one of those people that really questions new technology. And it's not because I don't believe it doesn't work. It's just there is no magic garbage machine. And so there's no magic garbage machine. And by the way, we want to make sure things work before any government. I always think about Montgomery, Alabama, and some of the other communities that have fallen prey to people that come in and say, here's your magic garbage machine, and they buy it. And then all of a sudden the community is strapped with this this concept or this idea that was never really, it was never really brought to reality to be used by someone else. And it becomes problematic. It's not fair to any community, much less Louisville. So I think there are options and alternatives to looking at what outlets you could have for gypsum drywall, and true of shingles and concrete as well. Shingle to asphalt recycling has fallen out of favor with Kentucky DOT. Absolutely understand. I've already mentioned this. Basically, when you step back and you say, okay, well, the specification needs to say, no more than 3%, no more than 4%. We can look at other states in your area, other states that have done this. One of the things that Tennessee DOT has said in the past has been, well, we know it doesn't work because of extreme weather. Well, Minnesota, and this is not me talking bad about Tennessee DOT, it's just Minnesota and Wisconsin do use recycled asphalt shingles repeatedly in their asphalt. And so there's a balance here somewhere. That's the hardest part, is finding the balance. And then construction and demolition reduction and reuse education does not exist. It's hard. It's hard to know that you would knock on the door of someone's house and say, hey, let me talk to you about recycling. Let me talk to you about what you put in your blue bin. That's one thing. But when you knock on the door of a company, or you knock on the door of a contractor and say, hey, can you start to collect these materials, because we really want these to be something that are recycled within the metro area. That's when you really have to bring larger groups of people together. It's the decision makers and it's the stakeholders, and it's those times when you can actually bring state government, local government, and your private entity, private businesses together as one entity to really kind of look at the problem and see what can be, and I say this a lot, and I don't mean it to sound flippant, but this can be solved and it can be resolved, and everyone can win as long as nobody gets greedy in the mix, because everyone has to understand the private company has to make money. The private company's there for a return on investment. Their investment is big. The city has to, or the private company has to understand the city has to keep a certain level of organization and a certain level of ordinance there to maintain consistency. And then the state learns from this project or any other project, and they're able to actually develop and or update any of their legislation that would match what you all have done, because you have proven that it would work, or it could be a solution, not only for Louisville, but for other parts of Kentucky. Next slide, please, Karen. So concrete, I've mentioned, basically it's, this is what you might see as a pile of concrete. This can go through a machine called a pulverizer or a grinder. Typically can come out anywhere from large shot rock down to very small pebbles and or sand. Next one. Gypsum drywall. This is a pile of gypsum drywall that's actually clean. This is from a construction site. Gypsum drywall is something you want to be careful of. There is going to be asbestos. That's going to be in older buildings, especially for remodeling and rebuilding. Demolition as well. We always speak of asbestos and the silica particulate in the air that you want to be cautious of. But gypsum drywall now is stamped since 1983, I think. It's been stamped so that there's no asbestos in that material now. So any of your new buildings or homes that were built prior to, say, 1985, those are the ones you want to watch and be cautious of, just double checking the drywall to make sure it doesn't have asbestos as part of it. But this is what a pile of just gypsum drywall clean cuts would look like. Next, and then here's your pile of shingles. So shingles are these have just been torn off of a commercial building. Basically, you would have just a pile of shingles that would come in, and these are obviously source separated. So do you source separate or do you commingle? It depends on what the market and what your private companies and or what your city decides to do as far as a processing facility. Do you want to process mixed C and D and pluck out the materials you're looking for have a lot of C&D fines at the end, which you can find an outlet for? Or do you want to, are you better off seeing it delivered or taken to specific outlets as concrete separate from gypsum drywall, separate from shingles? You don't have as much, you have contamination, but not contamination in the same manner as you do on a curbside program. And that's how you find me. That's my contact information. So I hope that was helpful. I hope that wasn't like this crash course in, all of this stuff. Oh my goodness. This is why I call it a wicked problem, because there are lots of tentacles to it. That made it.
You're muted, Pete.
Sorry about that. Thanks, Becky. Presentation was great. I think that in general, people need to understand the process, the difficulties and the barriers. I think you explained those pretty well. Louisville's in a little bit of a different, in a spot that, we want to get to a certain level, and we've had a lot of discussions. But we're trying to move forward. And at this point, I kind of wanted Adam and Matt Smith, they're the local guys. They're the experts in C&D material here. Wanted you guys to hear their points of view from the local side. Adam, you want to go first?
Sure. So again, my expertise is concrete and asphalt recycling, and then 10 years ago we were recycling shingles. But I think as far as the Louisville area and how well they do at recycling concrete and asphalt, honestly, I think they do pretty well just because of the economics of it. As I've tried to state that you can bring a 20-ton, 15-ton load of concrete to our facility and dump it for $40. You take it to any other landfill transfer station, it's going to cost you $1,000 to dump it. So it's for the contractors, the construction companies. It's a lot of it comes down to dollars and cents as to what drives them to recycle their concrete and asphalt. There are other options that people use to get rid of concrete or asphalt in the Louisville area, and those other options are basically fill sites, areas that quarries that are being filled back in, natural products, I think is a different name. But so I would say that the majority of all concrete and asphalt in the Louisville area is being recycled or taken to a fill site to fill in area. Now, the only times when I think you are missing out on some of that concrete and asphalt is when you get into demolition and you get into mixed loads, C&D, kind of how, as Becky was saying, where you'll get drywall, concrete, wood, debris that becomes, it becomes uncost effective to separate that out by the contractor. So they take it all to a landfill just due to the fact that it would cost them more to separate it out than it does to take it to a landfill. That could be recovered. I do think a sort facility that would handle that type of waste could potentially divert more concrete to be recycled. But again, I feel like the vast majority of the concrete and asphalt in the area is being recycled or used as fill just due to the economics of getting rid of it. As far as the recycled concrete, the market, it kind of comes and goes as to how the end use, the people who buy our recycled concrete, our recycled concrete is never used for any kind of state, county project. It's all used for private work. The best example that I can give to people of how the concrete recycling process works is, let's say your driveway, you have a concrete driveway that's cracking up, you hire a contractor, he removes the concrete from your driveway. Well, before he pours new concrete, they'll typically put down a gravel or aggregate base before they pour on top of that. And that's a prime use for our recycled concrete, is a base for them to pour that concrete on top of. There's other uses, many other uses. It can be used for probably lots of things it's not used for now. But that's the primary use. And again, it comes and goes, but we have been pretty successful finding outlets for the recycled concrete. Any questions, I guess, about the concrete recycling in Louisville or anything?
Yeah, Adam, if I could, I appreciate it. One question I have is that, we do use, like you said, to fill, and while that's not a bad use, it's not the top use, according to, the hierarchy that we should do. Do you think it would be a benefit to Louisville if we were recycling it versus using it to fill up a hole, if it's better?
Yes, I mean, it all comes down to the economics of it. If you got to the point where maybe you were able to get a little more money for that end product, well, then that may drive instead of paying to dump the concrete, you might be able to get to where it's free, or you can pay them to dump it. And then in turn, that would alleviate people from wanting to take it to a fill site. But right now, the way things are priced, it's so inexpensive to get rid of a load of concrete or hard fill that it's totally driven by the cost of trucking as to where people would get rid of it. So if you could overcome that obstacle, then yes, I think it would be very beneficial to recycle as much of that as possible, because then you're saving that fill site for some other use.
Gotcha. Thanks. Matt Smith, you want to go?
Thank you, Pete. I'll talk about two different things. First, we'll hit on the wood recycling. We do that every day. And in this case, we're talking about new construction wood, 2x4s, plywood, sheeting. Similar to Adam, it's very inexpensive to dump a source separated wood dumpster at our site. You're talking $80 to dump the whole load versus $40 to $55 a ton at the landfill. The construction sites are very poor, unlike the concrete, at actually making that happen. Not because of the economics, but because of the economics of the sorting portion. When they're on the new construction sites, getting the trades to get the material in the right dumpsters is the problem. It's not the recycling portion. Most of the wood that we get that is that type of wood will come from a manufacturer and or a shipping distribution yard that has scrap pallets or scrap crates or something like that. They're not trying to build a building where they have different raw materials there. So the economics make sense if you can get them sorted at the site to get us only wood. We cannot take wood that has concrete or metal in it other than nails, because the machines will not separate a chunk of concrete from a load of 2x4s. It gets pretty expensive pretty quick. The second thing that we have done in the past is gypsum recycling. It has probably been about 10 years since we did it. And we took it in and made soil amendments out of it. It did very, very well at making a good soil amendment for the mixes. We mixed it with compost. The problem was about 90 days after we mixed it with our compost, the sulfur smell got so bad that every agency that I could think of was in my office wanting to know what's going on. So we had to discontinue the use of gypsum because of the smell. We are actively now trying to figure out better equipment that we can process gypsum and keep it underneath roof so that we can not mix it with the compost, but land apply it on the agricultural fields. Therefore, we won't have the same sulfur smell. Currently, the economics don't work with that, but we're trying to research different equipment that it will do that. But once again, we're talking new construction, not tear downs, because you can't get it clean enough. You can't get the paints and the wallpaper, whatever else is on the drywall from a tear down facility. Pete, what did I miss there?
No, that's fine. So I think what you're saying is wood is a good product if we can get the sorting done, whether wood, I guess where we're trying to get to, what we're looking at is trying to get the material that comes in mixed. And obviously the concrete, I think concrete being separate is something that happens already for the most part. If you have a load that comes in from a construction site, where are the economics as far as being able to sort the wood, sort clean drywall, and seeing those checking those loads as they're coming in and diverting them to recovery versus disposal?
My opinion, the only way that cost effectively to do that, the load is going to have weight to it. Like it's going to have some concrete, something in there to drive the cost of the alternative to dump that, being the landfill, to where you can separate out enough stuff to essentially beat that cost. Does that make sense? So I'm saying if you had a load that was mixed with all kinds of different material, wood, gypsum, drywall, some shingles, everything in it, and it weighed 2 tons. If you took that load and you went through the manpower and effort it took to separate that out, you would never be able to make that cost effective versus just taking it to a landfill and dumping it.
Unless
If that same load maybe had 10 tons in it, then yeah, maybe you could make it work. But I think it still comes down to dollars and cents.
you're right, Adam. The only thing that changes, if you go to back with what Becky said there, you have to have some type of outside influence that's pushing them. You know, one of my thoughts that, KDOT was mentioned about 4 different times in her presentation. If I look around here, I don't see a representative from KDOT on this call. I think that's the first person we need to add to our group.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that gives you a good mix, if I may, that gives you a good mix of local business that understands it. And Adam, I think you mentioned you had been in shingles before as well. So you've got your shingles, your gypsum, your concrete, your wood. Those are 4 of the really big product categories in the C&D side. And again, they're much heavier materials than your residential recyclables. So looking at it overall, if you had someone from Kentucky DOT here, then all of a sudden you've got your state, your local, and your business. So you've got what I call the trifecta of making decisions and making this, pushing the effort forward, if you will, in the most effective way.
So in the end, I hear that we need a concerted effort on many levels to be able to get this done. The plan called for letting an RFP to bring in someone that can kind of coordinate this to help push these end markets, to develop the end markets. Is that, we put it in our plan. I'm hoping that it's viable to do. Becky, the question's to you, has any other communities put out an RFP to do something like this? Or have they driven it from the regulation side or an incentive side?
So Nashville is driving theirs right now from an incentive side. and they have a contractor, or I'm sorry, a consultant overall, but they didn't hire a consultant to tell them exactly what they wanted to do or which direction to go in, but they did hire a consultant to help with how do you incentivize? What do you do to actually make an incentive for people to use recyclable materials? San Francisco is probably one of the most effective policies out there. Now, I understand California is a bit extreme in a lot of what they do, but typically, again, these things start in California and the Northeast and they march to the middle. So we're usually the last ones to know, but guess what? That's a good place for us because we can take all of the things that didn't work for them. We can just check those off our list to start with. We don't have to start from scratch like they did. San Francisco's got a really good plan. They're actually a metro government with city and county together as well. Only I think they're identified as city and county, but they're still a metro government together in terms of solid waste efforts. I think the biggest thing is to look at, you have your 3 materials. And I say this only because I know who our members are. I'm not here to sell a membership by any means, but Louisville as a city or as a government agency could become a member for $300 a year. And everyone on your staff, everyone in the city of Louisville would be a member because our membership is based on company. And I think if you had access to things like our best management practices for construction and demolition recycling, which I can share with you. Couple of other, we've got a best management practices for gypsum recycling. It's a white paper we wrote with the University of Florida last year to give people those best management practices. How do you really start something like that? So if you have business owners in the community or people in the community that really want to do some of these things, but they don't really know where to start, we've got people in our association that have done this from scratch. We've got people in our association that have helped write the white papers that tell others how to do it. I'm glad, Pete, to put you in touch with, regardless of membership or not, I'm glad to put you in touch with some of our members that can help you understand how their local communities have done it. But I know San Antonio, Austin, San Francisco would be the biggest and the most extensive. But then Nashville is just in the midst of, they've only just started in the past year. They did a whole lot of homework on the front end, but they've only just started in the last year to actually build that ordinance and write the ordinance, put it on paper and get it to council for a vote.
So let me ask the committee this, based upon what we're hearing. It sounds like to me that we're a little bit early on deciding to hire a consultant quite yet. I think that being a member of CEDRA, I think starting a subcommittee that focuses on construction and demolition material, that we start to try to bring these people together and we let it take its course and see where we end up in the next year or so. Having somebody from the city that I guess does RFPs for roads, designs and stuff like that, somebody from the state, KDOT, trying to bring those people together. But if we have CEDRA there to help us as us being a member, they can help us along this trek, and that might help us from making a big mistake early. So that's kind of where I would like to see us go, is create, number one, become a member of CEDRA. Number two, start to form a construction demolition subcommittee, and try to bring all that together so that we can get a better roadmap on where we want to go on this. So do you guys think that that's the best way to go, or you guys see that as not a good way to go?
I think that's a good way. I'm wondering if, do you think there's any value in trying some kind of smaller pilot project with just metro agencies where we don't really need any kind of legislative approval or anything, but just with our vacant and abandoned properties through the Office of Housing and maybe in partnership with Public Works and Parks, just try to see what would work just within our projects before we scale community-wide?
I do. I believe, Sumeda, that you're probably in a unique position to help us bring that together. And, trying to get everybody that needs to be in the room. And I do think that while we go down this track, we can certainly try to start it small with Metro government to try to run that as an example of what we can do. And,
And Pete, I know
think-
we had also talked to MSD and Louisville Water, so there may be, a couple of other quasi-governmentals too, so we have a little more volume. But I think that may help us learn some things and, make some mistakes without a big consequence. And then, that might be a valuable experience. And I'm happy to help facilitate that.
Yeah, I think that would be great. So is that a track that everybody would be interested in?
I agree with you, Pete. I'm interested in the white paper on the gypsum.
Okay, well, we'll be a member of CEDRA before too long, for sure.
Yeah,
And
Pete, I do think that before we look into a consultant, that there's some things as a committee and starting local with, like you said, that roads and stuff that are paved, or the requests for bids that are paved locally, start there, see what progress we can make there. If we seem to not be getting anywhere after, a few meetings or so, then we revisit the idea of looking to hire someone. But I still think there's opportunity to move forward with some of this stuff without that.
Well, and that's why I mentioned membership again. I'm not here to sell you on a membership, but $300 a year is a whole lot cheaper than a consultant, because the other hat I wear is a consultant, and I understand that. And what typically happens is you go down a path and you kind of know what you want, but then you get in it and then you got, oh my gosh, then the consultant's asking for a change order, and then there's another change order. So if you kind of mold this before you go to the consultant, you at least know, you have a better idea of what you need from them. You don't need them you don't need someone to come in and write the roadmap for you, because it's your roadmap. Just like I tell people all the time, tell your story, because if you don't, tell your stories of success and the lessons you've learned, because if you don't, someone else will tell it, and they're going to tell it wrong because it's not their story.
Yeah, this is a pretty tall task for us. It's not our
Sure is.
wheelhouse, so to speak, for many of us here. You got some experts, obviously. So I think giving us a little bit more time to kind of feel our way through this thing would be a really good idea. And I feel pretty good about the idea of where we want to go at this point. I just feel like that we're a little bit too early for a consultant. I think we'll find where we need one, and if we need one, as we move through this subcommittee.
Pete, one
Is
of the
that-
other pilots that comes to mind to me, in addition to Metro, could be a partnership with BIA. I think that would be a potentially good avenue to take as well. Matt
And
and Adam could maybe work with a representative from BIA to see who might be interested in the pilot.
can you tell me who that is?
That's the Building Institute. That's the contractors in
Oh,
Jefferson County.
I thought you said V.
No,
Okay.
B as in boy, sorry.
Okay, now it
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah. She's been on our call from time to time.
Is
And
that,
that would be a group that you would want to elicit as a shareholder in that, for sure.
yeah, is that Stacy Roof?
No, she's the restaurant association.
Okay, yeah, okay.
Yeah. But that would be a good potential partnership to see about a pilot as well.
That sounds good. Okay. Well,
Ju-
C&D
Juva
is going to
Barber.
become a massive thing for us.
Yeah,
It-
Juva Barber was her name, Pete. She's been on
That's
our
right.
call.
I
Yeah,
got you.
yeah,
Yeah, I do remember the name.
yeah.
Okay. Well, is there any other questions that we can have? Brandon?
If it's okay, I just wanted to ask Becky one quick question. I saw your sort of hierarchy triangle, and it brought to mind something else I was familiar with. I'm familiar with this other EPA. It's in over the chat about it. This EPA image of the hierarchy that has to do with food waste
Yes.
and sort of the better uses. And in the food waste one, energy use is a higher ranking than compost. And in yours, you said compost was higher. And I was just wondering, when I think of C&D, I don't really think of any compostable material, because I understand the wood we're talking about is really, chemically treated or whatever. So just without wasting people's time, at the end of the day, what actual compost potential is there for C&D material?
So some of it would be wood that hasn't been treated. Some of that's coming from deconstruction. And then there always is some vegetation. It's hard to separate. One of the things that Matt says with separation, it's difficult. But wood is one of the main materials, and it does have to be tested, and you have to make sure it's not got certain chemicals. It hasn't been treated with certain things.
Okay, so it's really significantly more recycling than composting, even though they sort of lump them together. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
And if you look at concrete and you're making it into base of a road or a tear up the driveway and you make that the base of the next driveway, that's really it is recycling, but it's also a form of reuse. You're just reusing that same material, maybe in another way, maybe in another size, but you're still reusing it for the same purpose.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Brandon, I can probably expand on that a little bit for you. We do a few loads of those a day, but we take a lot of the material. This region is unique in that we have a large poultry market in our area. So a lot of this type of wood, if right, we can get into that poultry market, which is a little higher value, but also there is a market for that type of bedding, where compost sometimes is more difficult. But when we manufacture that, some of the real fine material we end up with ends up back in compost.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say the majority of the volume's not ended up there, but there is a portion of that manufacturing process that would end up back there.
Okay, thank you.
And also to add one more thing, Pete, and you and I have talked on this before, but Becky mentioned Nashville being a model potentially, or they're getting there. The city of Louisville would be shocked at how many loads a year I send to the city of Nashville, because they have an ordinance for retention basins. And they use the organic certified compost that Smith Creek makes in Nashville, because no one can make it to meet the certifications that they need.
Because nobody's taken the time or the effort or the energy to do it, and we pay you for it, which is great.
Yes.
I mean, it's good for you, but I'm glad you mentioned that, because the other piece is, there's a transportation component, and transportation I can't tell you how many people have come to me with really good ideas, and I think, well, that's brilliant, but how are you going to get it from point A to point B? And they just look at you blankly like, oh, but compost isn't going to spread wings and fly. It's got to get there from point A to point B. I'll tell you one of the things, and this is just to touch on it, not to belabor it. One of the things that I've seen work in other markets is when you actually have a collection company that owns the roll-off trucks that are on a construction site, and that contractor actually collection company actually hires someone from their team that stays on site. So instead of trying to train the construction folks, you have your collection company that's focused on lead, they're focused on clean material, they know what clean material looks like, and all of a sudden you have one or two people with 2-yard containers that are on wheels that fit in an elevator. They fit through narrow alley and narrow corridors in a building. But basically that person says, okay, today they're going to be pulling drywall. Tomorrow they're going to be, putting drywall up. Today they're going to be putting shingles up. So all of a sudden that person becomes your person on the ground, but your contractor's paying more to your collection company because they are providing that one person or two people on the ground that's providing that source separated piece. And they're people that are trained by the collection company. So the company that's actually collecting the material gets the benefit of clean material. They probably get more money or have to pay less as far as getting rid of it. More places will take their material because it's clean, instead of a mixed load. So more places would take cleaner material from them. So they potentially save on transportation costs. It does cost time, and again, there's a balance because time is money. But that's something I've seen work in some markets.
One other thing that I want to ask Becky is, how does green building and companies with I'm missing my words, but they have a sustainability, I guess, requirement within their company, and they're looking to build, they're looking to locate. Does the fact that we have a better or good recycling sustainability community here that's local, does that help us in attracting other businesses?
It does. It does, because so I'm just south of Nashville. I'm in the Franklin Spring Hill area in Williamson County. We have Mars Pet Care about 3 miles from my house, and it's their headquarters. And so they do still do a lot of research and development here, but some of the candy that's rejected, and it's not necessarily rejected here, but there's a plant in Nashville. So some of the candy that's rejected goes over to Sevierville. So they're actually hauling candy to Sevierville to be put into a Bedminster system in Sevier County, because they want to be zero waste. So how are they zero waste? They're paying that transportation cost. Nissan, we have their headquarters here in Laverne, Tennessee, very close to me. They haul all of their waste down to Huntsville, to the incinerator, to the Covanta incinerator, and they're able to say they're zero waste because it's all incinerated. It all becomes ash at the end. So companies are paying a lot more money to go the distance than they would be if there were opportunities closer to home or closer to where they put their headquarters or their facility. So yes, there's value to that. And I think if you look at it and you're starting to look at that bigger picture, which is where I like to find myself, is you're looking at the economic development piece. You're looking at the areas that need an economic push, but they don't need a landfill. Well, all of a sudden, a recycling facility for whatever material creates jobs. It creates a place for more people to work. It's a clean place for people to work. It's not as much of a nuisance, or it's not as much of a problem or seen as problematic as a landfill would be. So you're starting to see a picture of, okay, is there a piece of property that the city owns that might be willing to lease to a private company for them to build a facility in partnership? And then the state says, well, the demand should come from, we're gonna require that 5% of material in asphalt be recycled asphalt shingles. And all of a sudden, 5% isn't a whole lot, but you've started somewhere. And make sure they stay at 5% so that you don't abuse your asphalt companies by saying, oh, just throw it all in there. We just didn't know. But at the end of the day, we've created a very, it goes back to, for years, we've said recycling was free. And I tell people in my industry all the time, we really shot ourselves in the foot when we started telling people recycling was free, because it's never been free. So there is a cost to it. But when you look at shingles, what we did was we damaged relationships in that we were pushing it on asphalt companies. And they were like, yay, rah, rah, best cheerleaders in the world. And then all of a sudden they're out there spending a whole lot of money to fix something that failed after we, told them, hey, this is going to work. Well, it will work, but there's a limit to what you put in there. You don't just chuck a whole, you don't put, 5 tons of shingles in with 5 tons of hot mix. It just doesn't work. That's not the recipe or the formula that works.
Gotcha.
So we've come a long way, but again, it's wrapping our arms around those people that tried it and really got burnt and saying, let's do this a little different this time, and we're in it together. State, local, private company, we're in it together this time. We're not just looking for you to kind of drive the effort and do it on your own and take the hit.
Gotcha. Thank you so much.
And I'm available to you all if you have questions. I mean, this is a kind of like a passion project for me. This is the kind of thing I do because it's fun for me. Again, I've been in this business for many years. I've worked with people across the country. I love it. It's what I do. And I'm here to help you with answering questions or finding resources. I just think it's money better spent if you wait and you know a little more before you hire a consultant.
And just to quickly add to what Becky was saying, there's two ways that green building rating systems reward recycling. You can get points for actually recycling C&D waste, and you can also get points for using recycled content in your building materials. And in cities and states that have more options for this, that's really low-hanging fruit. I used to be a green building consultant, and everyone, that would be the first thing that people do just because it's the easiest thing to do if the infrastructure exists. So if we do have large companies like Yum Brands or Humana who have some kind of corporate sustainability goal, and they're trying to build all of their new facilities to those standards, then I think that we have a readily available market there if we have some kind of infrastructure in place. I don't know how we'd go about the research, but if there was a way to get a sense of, if there's some of these larger corporate partners that are interested in something like this, then that might help our case as well.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
All right. Does anybody have anything else, questions for Becky or comments or concerns?
Becky, how many members do you have?
We have right at 270 company members. So that brings in, 2,000 people. But we have right at 275 company members.
That's a good number of people.
And it's a mix. I mean, that's what I like about it. We've got some of our equipment manufacturers that could potentially help Matt with types of equipment that could be helpful. And Matt, I'm going to send you a couple of names I want to share with you. Not because I'm trying to sell equipment, but because I think they might be things you haven't looked at yet. We've got processors who actually process the materials. We've got roll-off companies that actually collect the materials. And so what I have found about this group of people, and I've been part of associations my entire career, and I found this group of people when I was doing a project for Middle Tennessee, and it was the first solid waste master plan. And when I found this research, I found this 750,000 tons of C&D material that was filling up MSW space in a landfill. I was flabbergasted. I was angry. I was like, what is this? That's how I found, oh gosh, there's this association out there called CDRA. And they truly are committed to, and I'm careful with who I hang my hat with because that's important to me in the business. But I was careful, but they were really a group that says, hey, we want to embrace our members and create value for the members. So we have committees like the Gypsum Recycling Committee that meets right now it meets every month. It typically meets every other month. The Shingle Recycling Committee and Markets Committee, and members are welcome to join any or all of those committees at any time. But it's a group of people that are like-minded, that have conversations, have guest speakers. We had a guest speaker from Armstrong last week who's also a member, but they're doing a project of, okay, we recycled this many acoustical ceiling tiles. What else can we do? What more can we do? What else could we use acoustical ceiling tile for once it's lived its life as a ceiling tile? So it's a good group of people. We do a lot of research. We do a lot of advocacy. I've never been a lobbyist type person, but I am the type person that will help anyone understand that to the best of my ability, whether they're elected people or not, because that's just it's my passion.
We appreciate you.
I appreciate you. Well, I appreciate your efforts, and it is difficult. Don't think it's easy, but know you're not alone, Pete.
Thank you. As far as that agenda item for the contracts committee, I think that's what we had. So I guess we're on to the rest of our agenda.
I noticed that Bruce is here. So we turn it over to him.
Well, in all honesty, Sandra, I would appreciate it if you would continue because my wife is in charge of a fundraiser for a nonprofit tonight, and I am sitting in the parking lot, probably getting talked about more. My ears are burning as we speak, but I'm going to have to sign off here soon and go into that fundraiser if there's not a vote to be taken.
Actually, I don't think there's anything more that we do need to vote on. The other thing is the hiring the consultant. Actually, the question we had was the RFP that has already gone out for the contract subcommittee. What is the status of that? Karen, you're
It's the
smiling.
capture rate study.
Correct.
Okay, so the capture rate study has been put out to bid. I think that there has been a couple questions that's come from interested parties. Those questions are getting answered. I think that it's open for 14 or 21 days. I'm not positive, but typically with something like this, we want to give extra time because it's not so much a cut and dry type thing. But I know that we've had some interest. I'm not sure when it closes, but as soon as it does, then we'll be having people to evaluate the bids and see where we're at. And, you know, we wrote it so that we can get ideas. So I'm pretty sure that once we have these bids, we'll probably have some discussions with individuals that did do that so that we can kind of flush out their idea for us to make sure that we understand what they're wanting to do. So that's where it sits at the moment.
The deadline for submissions is October 6th.
Oh, okay. We're at the public input part of the meeting. Is there anybody who wants to be heard on items relating to the agenda? Hearing none, the only other things are the announcements. The 109 board meeting is September 27th. The contracts and education subcommittees are October 10th. And our next advisory committee meeting is November 15th. And that is the end of our agenda.
Okay, sounds like, I don't know that, do we need to get a motion to adjourn?
Marie does that very well. Would you make a motion to adjourn, Marie?
Madam Chair, I make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you. Is there a second? Matt, thank you. All in favor? Aye. Thank you all.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
everybody.
Thank
Enjoy
you.
the rest of your night. Thanks again, Becky.
Thank you.